This is the Law 401 podcast, legal issues decoded for you, brought to you by Roger Williams University School of Law. Hey everybody, my name is Nicole, and this is the Law 401 podcast, Legal Issues Decoded. And today, I am with my co-host, Michael Donnelly Boylan, and my second favorite ever alumni of Roger Williams University School of Law, attorney Zach Lyons.
And who's your first?
Well, Zach Lyons knows who my first is. And maybe one day we will get attorney Michael Thomas on the podcast, who is my favorite ever alumni. But really, I'm just joking around. Zach is amazing, and I'm not really joking around. Zach is amazing, and I can't wait to interview him today.
So, Nicole, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about immigration law and a recent Supreme Court case called Noem versus Vasquez Perdomo. The case itself began in Los Angeles when a judge said immigration agents couldn't stop people mainly based on race, language, or where they worked. The Supreme Court quietly stepped in to let those patrols resume while the case continues. Now, while this feels like it is a case that is more national than local, these things are happening today in Rhode Island, and we're going to talk more about that.
And to help us understand this case and what this case means for law and for fairness, we're joined by immigration attorney Zachary Lyons.
Welcome, Zach. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you both for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I am a Roger Williams University School of Law alumni. I'm a Roger Williams University alumni as well. And
Don't they call that something?
A double hawk. I'm a double hawk.
Zach is a double hawk.
I'm a double hawk.
Hashtag double hawk.
That's right. And I have been practicing immigration law since 2017. So I have seen two Trump administrations and then one Biden administration. So two different administrations in the practice of immigration law. And I've practiced mainly really all across immigration law. I've done removal defense, which is defending people from deportation, business immigration, family immigration. I've filed lawsuits in federal court relating to immigration cases. So I have a vast, broad experience in immigration law.
And weren't you also in the immigration clinic at the law school?
I did the immigration clinic at the law school.
You were a student, and then you also were the teacher.
Oh, that's right. Yes, there's that too. Yes. So I was a student at the law school in the immigration clinic, and then I was the interim professor. I don't even know if I'm comfortable saying professor, but interim person who handled the immigration clinic at the law school.
We're really excited to have you here today. I like to start out with understanding basic language because I want to make sure that we are respectful to people. And also, I think there are a lot of people out there who want to be respectful but don't really know how. What do we call people who are undocumented? So some people call undocumented immigrants illegal immigrants, while others, I've seen T-shirts that say no one is illegal. Can you teach us a little bit about what is like a respectful way to talk about immigrants?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important. So I think that the most respectful way, or the two respectful terms, is one you used, which is undocumented. And an undocumented immigrant, or just someone who is undocumented or unauthorized even, because that language, those words focus on the status, not the individual. When you call someone an illegal alien or just an illegal, or the language that's being used focuses on the individual. And furthermore, the term illegal, although a person may not have lawful status in the United States, the term illegal is commonly understood to mean criminal, right? And as we know, most people who are undocumented, the vast majority, are not criminals. It's also not a criminal act to be undocumented in the United States. It's a civil offense, civil immigration violation. And so the term illegal is probably not appropriate or sensitive because, again, it focuses on the individual and it has a more negative meaning than saying that someone is undocumented or unauthorized, because, again, that focuses on their status, not the individual person.
That's really helpful. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I think there's a lot of conversations now that happen on social media. Yeah. And I see the word sort of illegal thrown around, which does have serious connotations of criminal or criminal
Right,
behavior.
right.
And so I guess what I hear you saying is if you're undocumented, you are not here, you haven't legally filled out all your paperwork, but you're not a criminal. You may be guilty of a civil offense, but not a criminal offense.
Right.
For listeners who may have only caught a headline, what exactly did the Supreme Court decide in this case? Or like we are back in law school, what are the facts of the case? What happened?
Yeah. So June of this year, we know the federal government was trying to ramp up immigration enforcement. They did an operation in Los Angeles where they deployed federal agents and they made thousands of arrests, I think like 2,800 arrests. And, many were caught on social media or reported in the news. ICE agents, federal agents were showing up, masked, armed, unmarked vehicles, grabbing people from Home Depot parking lots, farms, auto body shops, places where we come to find out they were alleging or they believed that there would be undocumented individuals. People were violently, in some cases, detained. And in fact, some of those who were detained ended up being U.S. citizens. 4 of the individuals that were detained that day, some filed suit on the basis that there was no reasonable or their Fourth Amendment was violated, which we'll talk about, but seeking to stop the government from these types of arrests of just showing up and basically just taking someone off the street without asking many questions about or truly verifying their status or lacking reasonable suspicion to make the arrest. Well,
Can I dive in for a few things?
Sure.
Because I think that you just said a whole bunch of things that I want to separate out. So one, people are making arrests because there's people on all sides of this from undocumented cars with guns, like many law enforcement people have, but also with their faces covered.
Right.
And that I could see might be difficult for them, and also could potentially probably is traumatic for the people, whoever they are, whatever status those people are, who are being captured, detained, whatever the right word is.
Right.
But then there's also the issue of it is impossible to look at someone and say to know their status.
Yeah. Right.
Because there's not immigrants from a country, there's immigrants from all over.
Right.
So if I'm detained, maybe this is a dumb question, but how do I prove my status?
Yeah. So
Like, do I just show my license?
I think you can't show. Your license is just is a state form of identification. All that does is prove your identity. But that a driver's license shows that you're a resident, or not even a resident. You have a license to drive, or you have an identification card from that state. So that doesn't prove that you're a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, someone on a visa, you're undocumented. It doesn't really prove anything. And so generally the way to prove status is to produce some document. In the case of a U.S. citizen, the only documents would be a U.S. passport or a birth certificate, right? And then in the case of someone who's in an immigration process, some other immigration document like a visa, a work permit, permanent residence card, something like that.
I thought it was inadvisable to carry your passport around with you at all times because, like, there's identity theft, things might get stolen. Are people supposed to be carrying like proof of citizenship around with them at all times?
Well, I think it's still inadvisable to carry those documents around, the hard copies, just because practically speaking, losing them is a hassle and a pain, right? But I think that now with cell phones, I think that the best way to prove your citizenship or your status would just be to carry a photograph on your phone, But I don't think it's advisable to carry those documents around. I don't.
So let's bring this really local, right? Yeah. This is in California. We're talking about this. Is this happening in New England? Is it happening in Rhode Island?
Yeah.
Is this local?
Yeah. So I mean, first, immigration is federal, so it's federally regulated, which means that although this operation occurred specifically in Los Angeles for this Vasquez Perdomo case, that the Supreme Court decided to allow it ICE to use these techniques, which we can discuss what the factors are, but to use it in any operation anywhere in the U.S. But we haven't seen large scale operations like this here in Rhode Island. We haven't seen that, right? We've seen smaller scale operations in Boston would be the closest. But then again, we have seen on a micro level, people getting parents dropping off their kids at school and being detained, right, by masked federal agents in unmarked vehicles, not identifying themselves, and then just detaining people very rapidly off the streets. We have seen that.
I keep hearing the phrase shadow docket in the news around this case. And that sounds like dark and mysterious. Can you explain really briefly what is the shadow docket?
Sure. So the shadow docket is an emergency, tool that the Supreme Court uses to make short decisions on an emergency basis without full briefing, oral arguments, the normal sort of procedure for a Supreme Court case.
So my understanding is if someone is on death row and there's some injustice that's going to be done, this is a way for the Supreme Court to sort of step in and, halt it while another procedure takes place. So where there isn't really time for this whole the briefings and the hearings, it's just this sort of temporary emergency thing. But what I guess we're saying here is that it is gone beyond just a temporary emergency thing, because in this case, it is setting forth a new standard for what is fair, or explaining a new standard for what is fair. Is that right?
Well, I think what it does is, in this case, right there, what they've done is so very briefly, the district court in California stopped these arrests they temporarily stopped the government from making arrests on the basis of perceived ethnicity. So, they perceived Latinos, the places where the people were. And then the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that stopping of those types of arrests in California. But then the Supreme Court reversed and said, no, the ICE can continue to arrest on the basis of these factors: perceived Latino ethnicity, not speaking English, and congregating in areas where they thought that there would be undocumented immigrants.
So what I keep reading in the news is reasonable suspicion is something that they talked about in the case.
Yeah.
What really is reasonable suspicion? Does that mean it's reasonably suspicious that they think they're going to be a criminal, or does it mean that they think they might be undocumented, or does it just mean something else completely?
So reasonable suspicion comes out of the Fourth Amendment, right? That protects all of us, not just U.S. citizens, not just permanent residents, even undocumented individuals, from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government, right? And so one of the standards that they use is this reasonable suspicion standard for when law enforcement may temporarily detain someone for the purposes of, in a criminal context, verifying determining if there was criminal activity being committed, or in the immigration context, verifying whether someone is in the United States lawfully. The standard for it is that, and the whole purpose behind it, actually, let's just back up, is that it's a way to protect all of us from unreasonable searches and seizures. And what it forces law enforcement to point to specific articulable facts, specific facts.
That's a heck of a word.
Yeah.
Articulable?
But they must be able to articulate the facts for which they are making that brief detention of someone. They are briefly infringing on our personal liberty by detaining the person, right?
So can I ask you, does that mean that if you're just a fisherman speaking Portuguese on a dock right now, or someone on a construction site speaking Spanish, is that enough? Is that what this case is saying? That's enough for them to check into their status?
So yes, because what no one disputed, the government, neither the government in this case nor the litigants, no one disputed. In fact, the facts were agreed upon that ICE was using those factors. They were using perceived ethnicity as a basis for detaining, briefly detaining someone to verify status and then arresting. speaking Spanish or speaking English with an accent and being physically present at these locations where they perceived or believed that there would be a lot of undocumented people. Like we talked about earlier, Home Depot parking lots, farms, auto body garages, places like that. So in your example, Michael, that of a Portuguese-speaking fisherman, I think that under this standard, ICE would say we have reasonable suspicion that this person is undocumented.
When the court talks about a totality of the circumstance, does that give these ICE officers sort of an open-ended checklist, like language, clothing, job site, or are there limits to what can and cannot be considered?
There should be limits, but I think what I'm talking about, those specific factors that the Supreme Court allowed ICE to use, right? Perceived ethnicity, the English language skills, and where they're located. Those factors were enumerated and found in the case. And so the Supreme Court allowed, and in fact, Brett Kavanaugh's concurrence said that those are acceptable for the purposes of verifying someone's identity and legal immigration status or not unlawful immigration status.
What would you say to somebody who says this isn't really about race, this is about social class, it's about who's holding the shovel versus who's holding the clipboard? Mm-hmm. What would you say to that?
I think that I would say that this is primarily about race only because, again, the Supreme Court, the concurrence, which is not all the justices signed off on it, and they didn't have to, but I think at least the majority is in agreement that, again, perceived ethnicity is one of the factors that ICE is considering. It's not disputed. They were open about this. But you're right. I mean, they're also not, they're targeting, they weren't saying, I mean, because really what we're actually talking about is Latinos, right? In this case, we're talking about the use of perceived ethnicity, Spanish speaking, and those sort of job sites. But certainly class is a part of this because the individuals that were targeted, the group, actually, it's not individuals, the groups that were targeted were working in working class, lower skill jobs.
Do you see this in your work? Like, how does this come up, if at all, in your job?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I would say that the individuals that I represent that are detained, more often than not, are Spanish speaking and are in construction, landscaping, in those sort of the same profile as the individuals that were detained in the Vasquez Perdomo case. I would also say that most of my clients that work in those, particularly in those types of jobs, have had ICE encounters. Whereas I also have I work with employers that have employees on high skill visas that have never come in contact with ICE. Never. Even if they might have fallen out of status, they've never had that sort of encounter. So we see it a lot more with those lower wage, unskilled jobs. So
do you think that the type of job someone does actually affects how the law perceives them based on the fact that, if you're at a higher status in a corporation working as an immigrant versus someone working in a Home Depot parking lot trying to get day labor?
I would say I think it's a combination of status and of work class and race and ethnicity, because those are the exact factors from this case that ICE is using. Right, I would say it's a combination of those. With, I would say, and just based on the facts of the case, race and ethnicity being the principal sort of idea behind the case.
How can you tell ethnicity by looking at somebody? Like, isn't that sort of like a flaw in this? I mean, like. Also, for example, like, you speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Like, that's not related to your citizenship.
No.
That's a language you learned, and,
Yeah.
How can we look at someone and look at their race or look at their language and determine what their ethnicity is based on that? Like, there's just part of me that's like, well, geez, that doesn't seem fair, but it also just doesn't seem accurate. How accurate is this?
Well, it's not, because in this case they picked up U.S. citizens as well. One of the litigants who sued the government was a U.S. citizen and couldn't remember what hospital he was born in, and so he was detained. And so it is flawed. It's 100% flawed way of interpreting, right, reasonable suspicion. It completely is. There's no, you can't perceived ethnicity. I don't even know what that means, you know. So, but unfortunately, that is now the standard that ICE is able to use, that the Supreme Court has signed off on for stopping and detaining people and questioning people.
Can I ask a follow-up question when it comes to individual bias? Like, how do I separate race, class, and language from individual bias when I'm trying to figure out what reasonable suspicion is?
It's a challenge. I don't know how you. I mean, I think that clearly it's very difficult to do that because, again, what they're saying is that to achieve reasonable suspicion, an officer, whether it's a police officer or an ICE officer, needs to consider the totality of the factors. So it can't just be one factor. It can't just be a hunch. I think this person looks undocumented. That's what our laws have said. However, in the questions that you're asking, we're eliciting and showing that you can use a hunch. That I perceive that this person looks Hispanic or Latino, is in a Home Depot parking lot. I believe that they are undocumented, and that's enough for reasonable suspicion. And so perhaps, I mean, to me, that there is a bias in that, but it's very difficult to separate the two, especially when the law. It seems like to me that the law is now allowing or encouraging that bias to then make an arrest. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
So, Zach, let me take you back to law school.
Yeah.
Let's ground this in the Constitution for a minute. What rights are being tested here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, really what we're talking about is individual liberty, right? What we're talking about is our individual liberties to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, right? And you know, again, I cannot reiterate this enough. Undocumented people have the same Fourth Amendment protections as myself. I was born in the United States. They have the same exact Fourth Amendment protections, or they should. Although, again, this Supreme Court case now says that maybe not. And maybe even U.S. citizens who look, quote unquote, Latino or Hispanic and maybe speak Spanish or at a Home Depot, potentially don't have the same Fourth Amendment protections as myself as a U.S. citizen born here, who maybe doesn't look, whatever that means, Hispanic or Latino. So that's the main right, though, is our individual, you know, liberty to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And you know, what I would also say is that what this is protecting us from is that even if there were, let's say that there were a mythical fake group of Zachs. Every Zach in the world was predisposed to commit crimes or engage in bad behavior, right? If you had 1,000 Zachs, everyone named Zach was predisposed to commit criminal acts. If there were one Zach who didn't engage in that behavior, who wasn't predisposed to engage in criminal behavior, the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect him from unreasonable searches and seizures, even if we know that every other Zach is predisposed to commit criminal activities. And so now it seems like that's eroding a little bit with this case.
So before this, you were talking about the totality of the circumstances, and that came from a Supreme Court case. Is that case overruled by this case? Like, what is the state of the law right now?
No, it's not, because again, first of all, we don't remember this is a shadow docket decision, right? So that means that we don't have actual guidance from the Supreme Court on this, right? We don't have actual, but Brett Kavanaugh has a concurrence, but it's not binding because he's the only one that signed off on it. None of the other justices signed off on it, which is also interesting. But the totality of the circumstances is still the standard. But I think they're saying that perceived ethnicity, speaking Spanish in the context of the immigration, perceived ethnicity, speaking Spanish or speaking English with an accent, and being in those certain locations where they believe there's a lot of undocumented immigrants can be factors for the purposes of stopping and questioning somebody for an immigration arrest or stop.
So another one of those legal terms that comes up all the time that I don't always understand is standing, right? Mm-hmm. Whether standing allows for a case to be challenged. Mm-hmm. Does standing affect who can actually challenge this case going forward?
Yes.
And what is standing?
Mm-hmm. Standing means that, you just have to have you have to show a cognizable, meaning a real injury that you have either suffered or will suffer in the future. So having never been, I guess you could sue in this case, but if I never, I have to actually have suffered an injury to be able to bring a lawsuit, or be likely to suffer an injury to be able to bring a lawsuit to court. And so part of this case is that standing in Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence found that the individuals who filed the lawsuit, including the U.S. citizen, lacked standing to bring that lawsuit. So what does that mean? That means that he found that even though their arrests in the past were on the basis of these factors, he found that it was unlikely. It wasn't likely that those individuals would be rearrested using the same factors in the future, right? And so they lacked standing because they couldn't show that.
But if the same person works at the same car wash or Home Depot and they look the same and they still speak the same language that they spoke when, as part of the totality of the circumstances, they got arrested, how is it possible that they couldn't get arrested again if the same group of people are making the same determination on the same factors?
Exactly. It doesn't make sense. Because absolutely these individuals would, if they were arrested based on those factors the first time, and ICE is now permitted to continue to use those factors to make arrests, it's absolutely possible. And they still go to engage in the same, they're still, I guess, presenting Hispanic or Latino. They still speak Spanish with an accent, or speak English with an accent, or speak Spanish. They still maybe go to Home Depot or get their car, go to their work at an auto body shop. It's absolutely plausible and likely that they would be arrested based on those same factors. So somehow, in his concurrence, Justice Kavanaugh found that they lacked standing. So that doesn't make any sense that he found that, but ultimately he did, and so that was another basis for stopping for allowing this policy to continue.
Can I get you to clarify one term? Yeah. I have a basic understanding, but concurrence. Can you just explain what a concurrence is rather than a decision?
Yeah, right. So in this case, because it's they're using the shadow docket, and this is not just true for this case, but for anytime the Supreme Court uses the shadow docket, all they have to do is write, like what they did, a one sentence. The decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is hereby stayed, or whatever their language was, so it allowed the policy to continue. And all six of the conservative members of the court signed off on that. But they don't have to give a full explanation, a full written opinion decision explaining their rationale. They don't have to do that because it's an emergency decision. However, if they choose to, some members of the court may write a concurrence saying, we agree, we signed off on the decision to allow this policy to continue, but I also want to give an explanation as to why. And in this case, it was a concurrence because it was only one justice, Justice Kavanaugh. The other 5 conservative justices didn't sign off, and then 3, so-called liberal justices issued a dissent. But he basically gave his reasoning for why he agreed to let this policy continue. And so that he was concurring with the decision, and that's why it's a concurrence.
When I think about Rhode Islanders who are just going through their life and they're having to do more work, and that money goes less far, mm-hmm. and like life is hard right now.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't appreciate everything that we have, but it can be difficult. What do you say about this policy, this decision, and the way in which it reveals about who may, when they're going about their business, feel safe in a public space and who doesn't feel safe in a public space?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think it's an excellent point. I think because my analysis of this case is that it's primarily about race. I don't think that it's actually about immigration completely. I think that anyone, again, who maybe presents Latino or whatever the image of the idea of that is, or Hispanic, speaks Spanish, I think even if they're U.S. citizens, right? I think that it erodes, or they will feel less safe in public spaces because they are subject under this standard to being questioned about their immigration status and having to prove their citizenship. That's the effect to me. So it's not just for so-called undocumented immigrants, but for people who maybe were born here but are Hispanic or Latino, maybe have to, or naturalized U.S. citizens have to now prove their U.S. citizenship, or worry about proving it, and worry about having encounters with ICE or federal agents who are trying to verify their status.
And there's all this sort of things tied up together. So there's race, but there's also ethnicity.
Yeah.
So race is a social construct, and then ethnicity is different than that. Mm-hmm. It's based on biology or culture, whereas race isn't. Mm-hmm. But in this, we have all these things tied together. But kind of the way you're describing it makes it seem like, because race is socially constructed, the people who are most vulnerable are the people who are sort of stereotypically thought of as whatever the race is. And in this particular case, it's Latino or Hispanic. Yeah. And so it sounds like you're saying, like, everybody, regardless of immigration status, who is stereotypically presents as this, and based on sort of the worst of American stereotypes, is who is vulnerable. Do I have that right based on what you're saying?
Yes, 100%. 100%. That would be my interpretation of what's going on with this case.
That's really hard to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to hear that, the law aside, this is also a podcast of humanity, right? And we are human beings, and that is just hard to hear. It's hard to hear that that's what we're doing in America. It's hard to hear that the law is not only sort of implicit in that, but explicitly complicit in that. That's just, like, disturbing. And I have a really hard time with that, especially given, that we're a law podcast and we're trying to talk about these things. I just want to express a tremendous amount of empathy for the people who this impacts. And it looks like the answer is it can impact a lot of people, not just the people who it was designed to impact. Mm-hmm.
Zach, let's try to make this really actionable for our listeners, who might be immigrants themselves. What should they know about their rights right now if they're approached from an immigration officer perspective? I mean, I know right now in Boston, you can't go out to a bar and not find a sign about how to protect your phone. What do Rhode Islanders need to know?
Yeah, right. So I think a few things. We kind of touched on it earlier. I think that in general, identification is good to have always, whether it's a license or a copy of a photograph in your phone of your legal immigration status here in the United States. I think, to your point, keeping your phone locked, even though, there's a whole nother issue there with the accessing phones that I don't think we need to get into. But, and then remember, like, we still, all of us, U.S. citizens, permanent residents, undocumented immigrants, quasi-documented immigrants, people going through the process, we all have a right to an attorney. We all have the right to ask the law enforcement, am I free to leave? Right? That's always the threshold question about if the right to an attorney or right to counsel attaches. If you encounter yourself, whether it's with police, ICE, or any other law enforcement or claimed law enforcement, that's another piece of this is making sure that you ask for a law enforcement identification. But we always can ask, am I free to leave? And if not, if they say, no, you're not free to leave, then you can say, I am going to exercise my right to remain silent and I would like to speak to a lawyer, speak to an attorney.
Do you have a right to remain silent if you are an undocumented person?
Yes, absolutely. That right to remain silent does not only attach in the criminal context. So if it's local police investigating a crime, it also attaches in the immigration context. Absolutely.
So what I heard is ask for an ID.
Yep.
Am I free to leave?
Yep.
And oh gosh, what was the last thing?
And then just, having your identification on you is helpful, and keeping the phones locked, I think, is another thing. They don't have the right just to look through your phone.
And you have a right to remain silent.
You do have a right to remain silent, yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I had a student come to me who's in one of my classes this week talking about someone they know who was detained by an ICE agent in the parking lot of the traffic tribunal in Cranston. And so I reached out to Professor Gonzalez to try to get some clarity on it. She did an amazing job of explaining that the process might be a little less than clear.
Can you tell our listeners who Professor Gonzalez is?
Professor Gonzalez runs our immigration clinic, and she's also a judge in Central Falls. So, Your Honor, Professor Gonzalez. Can you talk a little bit, if someone is detained in Rhode Island, and I then saw on Reddit that there's a post talking on the Rhode Island subreddit about there's like an immigration office in Warwick, and where does the person get detained? Do they get detained in Warwick? Do they get detained in Boston? Do they get detained in Central Falls? Like, where physically are they? Like, if I want to get somebody legal help, or if I want to talk to somebody, how do I get to them? And then where will their hearing be, if there is a hearing?
Well, I mean, now what we're seeing with people who are detained is they may initially, if it's in this example, if we continue the traffic tribunal example, they'll be detained by ICE, processed, and then either held at Wyatt in Central Falls, is our only Rhode Island ICE detention facility, is Wyatt, or sent to maybe Plymouth, Massachusetts. There's a detention center in Plymouth, or maybe somewhere else in New England. So the first answer is I don't know. I mean, I've had cases where people have been detained initially in Rhode Island and then sent to Bristol County, or to Plymouth in Massachusetts. But then now what the federal government is doing is they're very rapidly moving them to another state far outside the jurisdiction. So Mississippi, Louisiana, New Mexico. And so what happens then is that the individual who's detained, if they're moved out of state, they will have an immigration court hearing in the immigration court with jurisdiction over where they are detained. And so even if they're initially held at Wyatt, but then they're transferred to Louisiana, the case will then be with a judge in Louisiana.
So let me ask you, if I was an employer or a community organization here in Rhode Island, right? And I want to stay within the law, but I also want to support my people. How would you suggest that they do that?
I think the first thing is that is letting them know, maybe connecting them with potentially with, I guess number one would be to identify legal resources that the employees can access, right? Whether that's private attorneys or community groups that can support in the employees, and then that gives the employees the option to maybe, at least if you connect with an organization as an employer, and you let your employees know that you've connected with an organization or with a private attorney for the purposes of consultations, whatever, they can maybe take the initiative and then access those resources on their own. Because I don't know that as an employer you necessarily have to, provide those services yourself, but at least opening the door and maybe even gathering just information. Never mind contacting private attorneys, but just giving them information. Okay, here are some local organizations that work with immigrants on different legal issues or whatever, and you can go have a consultation with them, or at least you have their number in case that something goes wrong. I think that's one sort of easy way that employers can support their employees.
So if somebody is listening, if an employer is listening, can you share some of the names of those local organizations so that we can put it in the show notes? I assume they can contact your law office, but can you share some of the other organizations that might be available? Because I don't think you can reasonably represent everyone in our state.
Yeah, definitely. So Dorcas is probably the biggest one. It's in Cranston. They provide all different immigration services. And I think that's a good starting point, at least to connect people with. There's also Amor is another group there in Providence. Progresso Latino. The Rhode Islanders University School of Law Immigration Clinic takes some cases and might be a resource for some people as well. But those are probably good starting points. And even if those individual groups cannot offer the service that maybe the employee needs, they will have the network to be able to connect them with someone who can provide that service.
And you can find all those resources in our show notes, just so that you have places to go back and review and dig a little bit deeper on this. This has been a really heavy topic, and I appreciate you coming in today. Oftentimes we dig into heavy topics here, and so we try to end on a little bit of a lighter note. So we have a tradition of asking a more fun question, which I'll leave to Nicole.
I don't feel very fun right now, but I'm going to give this a shot. So as we are recording this, and then as it airs, we will be heading into the holiday season, and that is Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever it is for you and your loved ones. Can you tell me a Rhode Island tradition, big or small, that you look forward to at this time of year with your family?
Well, one of my family's only traditions, and I think it's a wonderful tradition, is on Thanksgiving, we do the pie run at the YMCA in Newport. So it's a 5-mile run, goes by Second Beach down in Middletown. It's very beautiful. Sometimes you get a really spectacular day. Sometimes you get really bad weather, but it's something that even if everyone in my family isn't doing the race, or either whether running or walking, somebody usually is doing it. And so it's just a really nice tradition. And then we go back to my mom's and we have breakfast, but it's a really nice way to start Thanksgiving.
Where is the pie and the pie run? I'm less interested in the running and more interested in the pie.
So they give out a lot of pie, table talk pies. They give out a bunch of you can get little mini pies, apple pies.
Like at the starting line or like at the finishing line?
I think both. You could get it in both places. Yeah,
I might be in on this. It's like, can you get it in the middle of the walk?
That hasn't happened. I haven't seen that yet.
It hasn't happened yet?
Yeah.
So what's yours?
So I would say for the Advent season, my family always goes to see the Nutcracker somewhere. But that's not really Rhode Island related. So Rhode Island related, it is at the law school. Every year in the last, 8 years or so, we have a cookie swap, a faculty and staff cookie swap, where people bring in like a lot of cookies, like 5, 6, 7 dozen cookies. And it could be the same cookie or different cookies. And we all put it out there and we all swap. And so some people make like traditional family recipes or traditional recipes to celebrate their ethnicity or their region. Some people buy their cookies. Some people make cookies that are gluten-free or allergen-free. It's a nice mishmash of cookies, and I really look forward to seeing everybody in one room at one time. But also, it's also the time where the students are taking finals. So, like, we're in that sweet spot between teaching the classes and grading the finals, and everyone can come together and eat cookies and listen to music and wear ugly holiday sweaters and drink eggnog. I know eggnog is controversial, so sometimes there's also apple cider, but it's a joyful day. How about you?
Since when I lived down here in Providence years ago, we started going to Wickford for Christmas to see Santa come in on the boat and all the lights, and that's beautiful. And this year we hit the Breakers for their Christmas lights and their Christmas decorations, and that was gorgeous. So
I am really looking forward to in November I have Patriots tickets.
Nice.
And I also want to go to one of the mansions does a Nutcracker.
Oh, really?
Where like the party scene, you're not like sitting and watching you're like kind of a guest at the party. Cool. And so I'm looking forward to getting tickets for my family this year.
That'd be a lot of fun.
One of our students, one of our alumni was in it and told me about it. And so I'm really excited about that.
So, Zach, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We've been looking forward to this since before we even started the podcast itself. So,
yeah, we knew you were going to be one of our guests.
Yeah, very kind.
So please refer back to the notes and the show notes to get more information about this. And also, if you have an idea for an upcoming episode, go email us at law401podcast@rwu.edu. You can also find our podcast on all the major platforms, Apple, Spotify, you name it, YouTube. Please go and give us a review, a like, a follow. We would like to get this podcast out to more Rhode Islanders.
I want to amplify that. We talked about one case in this podcast, but we didn't go into sort of habeas motions. We didn't go into a whole employment immigration. We didn't go into a whole bunch of things related to immigration that we could talk about. So if there are other issues that you would want to hear more about or learn more about from reliable sources, please email us and let us know. What is our email address?
law401podcast@rwu.edu.
So thanks for being with us here today, Zach. Like us, subscribe, write a review, share us with your friends, share us with your enemies, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Thanks for tuning in to Law 401, Legal Issues Decoded from Roger Williams University School of Law. We'd like to thank our guests on the show today. The Law 401 podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Hassenfeld Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank executive producer from RWU Law, Helga Melgar, the RWU Marketing and Communications team, podcast social media manager, Ali Michelle Conti, and our production partner, Focus Forward Media. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Roger Williams University or our partners. For more Law 401 episodes and updates, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts on YouTube or visit law.rwu.edu.